Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Exploiting Innovation. As many of you will know, my name is Ilona Alcock and I'm co-founder and director of Elevate. We're a business development consultancy and we have three key focuses, which are sustainability, community, and innovation. And delighted that our innovation programme is run in conjunction with what was RTC North and is now Innovate UK Edge. So in case you're wondering why the branding's changing, that's the position at the moment. So RTC North had been a delivery partner for Innovate UK and they're going through rebrand as Innovate UK Edge, and that is the branding that you will be able to see. So what we were really keen to do as part of this series of webinars is to really go through kind of what innovation is, how it works, but also how can we make sure that that's commercial. It's really lovely to be innovative and come up with all these new and exciting things, but that does actually need to form part of a business plan, part of a strategy for getting in front of customers, and of course protecting the IP of anything new and exciting that you create. So we're delighted to have some experts from Innovate UK Edge. We have Andy Taylor and Wayne Bryant here with us today, and they're going to talk through a lot of those issues for us today and give us some real kind of practical tips and guidance. They are really keen to hear from anybody, whether you're watching this live or you're watching this back on the YouTube channel. So for those of you watching live, when we end the recording after the presentations, there is an opportunity for you to ask questions, drop it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask those questions. For those of you who are watching this back, we will be sharing contact details of the speakers if you want to get in touch with them directly, or of course get in touch with Elevate and we can pass that on. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Andy to do a fuller introduction himself, and hopefully we have all the tech right for him to be able to screen share as well.
Thank you very much, Ilona. Yes, welcome to this morning's webinar about exploiting innovation. I'm here with my colleague Wayne Bryant, and if I could screen share now, I will introduce myself shortly. Let's just try this. There we go. So hopefully you'll be able to see that. Great. Okay, so my name is Andy Taylor. I'm team leader at our Yorkshire and Humber office. So we cover the north of England. Wayne Bryant is based in our northeast office, although obviously at the moment it's very much still working from home. So my background is R&D science. I was a new product development engineer in the silicon processing industry for a number of years. Then I moved on to actually do a knowledge transfer partnership, which was my first taste of Innovate UK, or Technology Strategy Board as it was back then, and worked between a university and a company to develop and commercialise technology and intellectual property. So my role now is managing a team of innovation specialists, and I am actually still delivering the innovation specialist role as well, alongside my colleagues. Wayne, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, so hello everyone. Wayne Bryant, RTC North. I've been with RTC North for about 7 years. I come from a long-standing health and life sciences and healthcare background. I've worked in private sector and public sector healthcare for a lot of years. Previous to being at RTC, I was a manager at NHS Direct, and previous to that, I worked in developing a lot of domiciliary care businesses. At RTC, I've spent about 4 years working with NHS Trusts, developing their intellectual property portfolios and helping them exploit their IP and make money off the research that goes on in the NHS. More recently, I've done similar work with SMEs and also European Research Consortium and diffusion energy. So a lot of work in technology transfer, exploitation of IP for businesses and what it means to them and how they can make money off it, that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. Right, so we're going to cover quite a lot of ground today. We're going to skim the surface and dive down a little deeper into a couple of those areas. But hopefully you'll leave with a better understanding of what's involved in exploiting innovation. And perhaps, well, hopefully you'll have a few ideas as to where you can improve your own businesses and your own approach to innovation, and a few tips to get you started. So let's start by defining innovation. In terms of innovation, it's very much a word that means different things to different people. You know, it's if you ask 10 people, you get 10 different answers. But we're going to talk about today what it is, why we do it, and then we'll touch on an approach to innovation, how to accelerate and reduce the risk and these kind of things. But in terms of the definition, this is one definition that we quite like. The successful exploitation of a new product, service, process, organisation or business model, new to a company, new to a market, or new to the world. So the key to successful exploitation is therefore how your organisation identifies, implements, and ultimately manages these innovation activities that we're going to talk about. And the activities could be fundamental activities such as defining your vision or your value proposition. They could be strategic in nature, they could be organisational, creative, operational, or cultural. But essentially, what we're talking about here is a business trying to do something differently, as a more simple definition of innovation. So why do we innovate? So a business that stands still, doesn't innovate, is really at risk of being overtaken by the competitors, or simply not realising your full potential. In an increasingly fast-changing world, as we know at the moment, things are moving quite quickly, in particular in terms of digital. If you don't react and respond, then you risk failure and your competitors will overtake you and you will fall by the wayside. So yes, these recent world events are exposing those who can't move quickly enough and respond to the rapidly changing marketplace. In essence, good innovation is going to help you to sharpen up. But besides the more obvious benefits of innovation, such as better products, services, more customers and sales, this list here really gives you an idea as to why you would choose to innovate. Obviously, enhanced growth, profitability should be high up on your list of reasons to innovate. Creating a business that's sustainable in the long term, more resilient to the kind of problems we've had over the last year. Can move with the times and outpace your competitors. That's got to be an attractive proposition to you as a business. Or perhaps maximising your business value is high on your list, your attractiveness to investors or being acquired. Then we have the people side of innovation. You know, retaining your employees and being appealing to the best new recruits as you grow, because a lot of industries that really push the edge of the envelope of innovation require the best staff to do that. And you're not going to attract the best staff without having some kind of approach to doing that. So hopefully these are good enough reasons for you to keep listening today. And let's move on again. So a warning. Be in no doubt that breaking out of the business as usual that you can be trapped in is often hard. It involves risk. It can be costly and it can feel quite uncomfortable. There will be challenges and resistance along the way, and there's no guarantees of success. But the rewards for those who have the right approach are there for the taking. And you don't have to look very far to see examples of successful innovation and how they can be transformational to a business. So yes, if we look at something which you've probably looked at or glanced at 100 times already this morning, the humble smartphone. It seems as though they've been around for quite a while now, but I suppose it is only the last kind of 10 years that they've really matured and come of age. And it's the integration of a number of technologies that's allowed this. For Apple, for example, the iPod was a great success, but the iPhone was truly transformational. Behind the scenes, Apple is never going to stand still. They're always looking to develop, streamline, create, invent, protect, increase the value of their brand. And all these activities demand the need for embedded processes within the business that consider innovation and approach it in the right way. And it can be structured, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But it's these embedded innovation processes that have been the key to the successful exploitation of the smartphone. And Apple now have a market capitalization or value of over $2 trillion. And a lot of that has been down to the iPhone. So, what are the barriers to successful innovation? Before we consider the specific innovation topics we're going to talk about today, what potentially could hold you up? It's very common for early stage businesses in particular to get lost in the detail of making, creating, doing stuff. We encounter it a lot when we work with small businesses. The lack of long-term strategy that's written down and communicated might lead to a lack of direction, but at worst it can lead to wasted time and effort. And if this sounds like you, then start by developing a vision for the business and write it down. And once you're happy with that, develop your strategy to achieve it. Perhaps you don't have that growth plan that clearly outlines how you're going to achieve the year-on-year growth that you're looking for. Again, write it down. And maybe you need to consider your customers' needs and what the market wants. And we can go into a bit more detail in a minute. Perhaps your current management structure is holding you back. And the process of restructuring your business is needed. That can unlock more resource in the right places. But maybe it's the lack of funding. That's quite a common thing. You've got some great ideas, you know how to do it, but don't have the cash to fund it. And there are processes here to learn and embed within your business how to approach grant funding, private investment, that kind of thing. It can all be put into a process that you can follow. Maybe your culture is unsuitable for what you're trying to do as a business, or your internal processes are just not set up to develop, and nurture those good ideas and promote growth. And there's always the case where you need to access external knowledge, resources, and technology. Partnering quite often is key to unlocking success in innovation. The so-called open innovation model is something that perhaps you should consider. So if any of this sounds like you, then you've got work to do, and we're here to help. So where do you start? These are just some of the things that you could consider. But a good place to start is with your ambition as a business. Where do you want to be 5 or 10 years' time? What does success look like? This is your organisation's vision. And quite often with early stage businesses, this is in your head. This is not written down. It's ideas, and it's maybe a conversation between you and another director. So get it onto paper, and that's always a good thing to do. But this can be a considerable exercise in itself, but you should involve all the key decision makers within the business. And part of this exercise might be to consider your strategic context as an organisation. Excuse me. This helps you make sense of the environment you operate in, really. And you can use classic tools that most people have heard of, like SWOT, PESTLE, Porter's 5 Forces, these kind of things that help you to map the environment you operate in. So once you've defined your vision and you understand this context that you're operating within, you can begin to think about what you need to do, and your innovation journey begins here. So this slide really outlines some of the other areas which you maybe should be considering. But one area that we focus on quite a lot is understanding your customer and defining your value proposition. And this is a great place to start, because if you're trying to sell something which no one wants to buy, then you're not in a great place. So innovation often relates to how a business organises itself internally to achieve success. But this could be the way the business is structured, or perhaps how it demonstrates good leadership. It could be about sales, marketing, how you sell your existing products or services, or introducing new manufacturing processes and achieving efficiencies. These things are generally incremental innovation, but looking outside of your organisation and analysing what the customer really wants and how you're going to deliver it might lead to more radical innovation. And this is our approach to understanding the customer and really developing great products and services. So what could this process look like? Well, I imagine some of you have seen these kind of tools around. In short, these tools help you to understand your customer and let that process of understanding your customer drive your value proposition. We still regularly see products and services that must have sounded like a great idea at the time, but are a sales disaster once they reach the market. Embedding a process within your business that evaluates and tests the ideas you have from a customer-driven perspective can save you a lot of time and money. In this way, you test the ideas, you quickly kill the poor ideas, and then you put more time into testing and developing the promising ones. Fail fast is something you've probably heard about before. There's a myriad of theories and tools out there to help you do this. One of the best we use consistently is the strategizer tools, value proposition canvas, and business model canvas. So the value proposition canvas helps you to understand your customer and target their needs, and develop your products to absolutely target those needs. And what is it? It's kill the pains and feed the gains. And the business model canvas kind of comes after the value proposition canvas, we think, in most cases. And it's there to help you to develop your approach to how you deliver that value to your customer and make money from it. And all this can be done within the safety of your living room at the moment, I imagine, or your boardroom once you're back in the office. Prior to committing yourselves fully. So, test, and get these things on paper. And finally, I've just put another tool in there, which is quite interesting once you've actually got those ideas and you've really solidified the ideas. And that's the KTN Innovation Canvas, which is there to really help you plan your projects better and see if you've considered everything you need to consider before you really start to commit and get down to developing those great products and services. Right, funding. So this is obviously something that small businesses, early stage businesses are always asking for, and we get it all the time. It's where do I find funding to fund my innovation? Well, it's quite often difficult to go to the bank because what you're doing is perhaps too high risk. Grant funding is a great way to facilitate innovation in your organisation, and grant funding is usually about the higher risk type activities. And it's an enabling factor. It reduces the financial risk of innovation. And actually the process of writing an application in itself, whilst time consuming and not easy, that will make you think about all aspects of what could be your next successful innovation. So you will have to think through all the different things, the market, the customer, the great people you've got, the management processes, etc. And those tools I mentioned previously can help you do that. So many grant funded projects also require academic and industrial partners, and the rewards of being part of collaborative larger projects with multiple partners are great, because they often help you to develop a newer technology that fits into a market that's emerging. So it puts you in the right place to actually start commercializing and selling into that emerging market. But finding the right funding competition is one thing, and we're here to help identify that kind of signpost you to what you need to be doing and looking at. And developing your capability to write a worthy proposal is a different matter altogether, though. Again, we can help you, can help shape your proposals and help critique them and say where you're weak and where you need to get better. Because a lot of these grant funding competitions are competitive, and make no mistake, it needs high quality applications to have a chance of success. So private investment is also the other approach. This requires, again, understanding the fundamentals of innovation that we've already touched upon. Preparing an effective investor pitch deck is another skill that requires learning, and it has to have all the right things in there and touch all the right points for the investor to be interested. And again, that's something that we do help with. But learning from those that have done this previously and know the territory will be key to your success here, both with grant funding and private finance. And a good innovation management coach will be able to help advise. Right, so I'm going to move on to, I'm going to pass on to Wayne, who's going to talk about protecting your innovation. Again, another critical element to exploiting your innovation. Over to you, Wayne.
Cheers, Andy. Thank you. Can you manage them slides?
Yep.
Brilliant. So yeah, guys, obviously talking about the topic of intellectual property, and can I say, your business itself, firstly, it needs to assess how involved it wants to be with intellectual property, and your IP strategy needs to align with your business planning. No one's saying you have to try and patent all your ideas and spend thousands of pounds, or you have to protect to the nth degree and everything. We just advise that as a business, you have addressed an intellectual property strategy and aligned an intellectual property strategy with your business plan, whatever that strategy looks like. So let's talk a bit about IP. As Andy started, let's start with a definition. What is intellectual property? Intellectual property refers to the creation of mind, inventions, literary and artistic works, symbols, names, and images used in commerce. So it's stuff that you create in your mind that ultimately you own, and the ownership of it only moves when it's expressed through legal agreements or legal movement, shall we say, in broad terms. So different types of IP, and this is ways that IP is registered or what type of IP you have. Firstly, copyright. So copyright is something that protects artistic and literary works. You'll have seen on books and music, copyright stamps asserted on the bottom of things. So anything that you create that's literary works or artistic works in your business, you want to assert your copyright. Now, this isn't a registered right. So copyright isn't registered with the Intellectual Property Office. It's automatically owned by yourself when you create these works. And the reason we assert it through a copyright stamp, and you'll have seen these, as I say, it's just got a little C with the circle, the name of the business or the person who created it and the year in which it was created. Whether that is there or not on the copyrighted material, it's still copyrighted whether it's there or not. But the only way to assert that and let people know that you know it's your copyright and that you are asserting that right is by putting that stamp on there. You might well see more comprehensive stamps where it tells you who you might want to contact should you wish to use the copyright and things like that. But it's worth considering that all the literary works and all the creative works that you create are automatically protected by copyright, but you should look at ways of asserting that. Secondly is trademarks. So trademarks come in two forms, registered and unregistered. Obviously, registered is a registered right. So there's a searchable database of registered trademarks on the government website. A trademark, just a couple of examples of trademarks. Dove soap, so everyone knows the logo for Dove soap. Now, a trademark can't describe what the service or product is. So although doves are birds, they're not soap. Actually, when you see the Dove soap symbol, you know that that represents soap. So it doesn't describe what the product is because you can't protect that. But because you see the logo, it's a registered trademark and you know what that means. They can be unregistered. So if, for example, you've used a mark for many years and it's a particular brand mark that you've traded with for many years, if another company came along and registered that trademark and you got into dispute with them, you would have 20 years of evidence of using it as an unregistered trademark. And you know, you needn't necessarily think that because they registered it as a trademark that they would get to keep that. So it's best to register your trademarks because then it's on a registered database and there's a sort of flag in the ground to prove it's yours. But if it's unregistered as well, it can still be considered a trademark, okay? Trade secrets do what they say on the tin. Again, they're not a registered mark. It's literally a secret that you have, a secret that makes up your product and how it works, your methods or your business and how you deliver it. You keep it secret, therefore it's your intellectual property and no one else can use it. If you share your secret, then it will no longer be a secret, so you can't keep it as a trade secret anymore. It's quite self-explanatory. There is work you can do with trade secrets around keeping trade secret databases and such forth in order to evidence these things, but it does do what it says on the tin. Next is patents. So patents are a registered right again. The most highly regarded registered right, and they protect inventions and the way things work. So if people have come across patents before, they can be quite expensive in registering, but they do offer you the most robust protection in the intellectual property world. And ultimately, as we discussed at the start, if when you're registering a patent, as long as your IP strategy aligns with your business plan and you foresee when you will get that return on investment, then you can offset the cost of that patent by using it correctly. You know, I'm not here to tell you about you should definitely patent something, but if you have good protection which allows you to monopolize a small corner of a particular market, then that investment in a patent will, you know, you'll know when you're going to get your money back, and it'll be a good investment in itself. Lastly, designs. So designs tend to work alongside patents. So a lot of people have a patent on how something works, might have a number of registered designs because they protect how something looks. So it's a registered design. There's a searchable database again on the government website, and it doesn't protect how something works. It protects really something's visual appearance. And as I say, they're quite often protected alongside patents to give a robust suite of protection in whatever you are protecting. As I say, we've already covered what registered rights are and what unregistered rights mean. So registered means it's registered with the IP office, and you've put your flag in the ground and someone knows it's there and it's on a searchable database. Unregistered, a bit harder to prove, but if you've asserted copyright, if you've kept good documentation over the years and you can evidence things, then unregistered can also have value as well. Do you want to move on, Andy? So who owns intellectual property? And I think I touched upon this at the start. The owner is normally the inventor, the designer, or the creator. So it's your property. If you came up with it and you designed it, you thought it up, at that moment, it's your intellectual property, unless it moves through some sort of legal term, okay? So ownership often automatically gets transferred to an employer when the intellectual property is created within the job owner's first role. So if it's your job to think about R&D processes and create things, then it would be viewed that that intellectual property that you create moves to your employer in most cases. But as an employer, you should have a term in your employee contracts clarifying that movement of IP, because if the clarity isn't there, then it could be looked upon that it didn't move. Do you know what I mean? An example of when it would move and when it wouldn't, and this comes from when I was working with NHS trusts and such forth, if a surgeon creates a new scalpel, a new novel scalpel for operating on someone, then it would highly likely be seen that that was created within line of his work and that the IP would revert to the NHS trust that he worked for. If a cleaner who cleans up the operating theatre comes up with a new surgical device, it would likely be seen that that's not within the line of their work because they're a cleaner, and they would retain the intellectual property themselves unless it was written in their employee contract that moved it, okay? IP agreements transferring ownership of IP to the correct party are very important. So it's just a case of keeping in mind in the IP world that when you create something, you own it. It's a tangible, think of it as a tangible object, and it doesn't move until a legal agreement moves it somewhere else. So that's very important. And knowing where it's moved and how it's moved is important to keep clean IP. So clean IP is something that we'll talk about going in a few minutes, but keeping clean IP is very important. Never assume IP rights have been properly transferred until you see it in writing. So this is all about them legal movements of your intellectual property and where it belongs, where it sits, where it was created and where it goes. Thanks, Andy. Do you want to move on to the next one? So let's move on to what's the point. So why get involved in IP and why use IP within your business? So IP provides a mechanism to sue third parties for unauthorized use. This can be costly, and there's avenues to resolve disputes before it goes to court. So we're not working with businesses. I try not to talk to businesses day to day about going to court and asserting your IP through legal action, because it can be expensive, and there's a culture out there that feels that might get trampled on by the bigger man, and that can happen in the legal world, as I'm sure you all know. The person with the deeper pockets can take you further and ultimately win. But there is other avenues to resolve disputes, and ultimately most disputes are resolved before proper legal proceedings come into place. So do get involved in IP and don't be put off by the fact that you might not be able to afford to execute it in court. It's used largely as a deterrent. So when we talk about it never going to court and us not wanting it to go to court, it's to stop people from trying to use it in the first place. So it lets people know someone owns the rights for an idea, and it cannot just be used freely. So people see it. And when we talked before about copyright and copyright assertion, I talked more about robust copyright statements. That's saying, this is my copyright, and you can use it in these terms, or you can contact this person should you wish to use it, and they will tell you the terms under which you can use it. At that point, you can open up discussions about licensing your IP, people purchasing your IP off you, licensing it under particular terms, or using it on a particular basis under license, so you can manage it in your own terms. It can increase credibility. So when seeking investment or applying for funding, a tangible and tidy intellectual property portfolio can increase your credibility. Obviously, Innovate UK invest in a program that I oversee called the IP Audits Plus scheme. And that's because when Innovate UK are giving out funding, they want to know that they're investing in projects that have clean IP. So when we talk about the movement of IP, and if you've created IP, if it has moved, that it's moved cleanly and that you know where it's moved, and that can be evidenced by legal agreements watching it move. And all types of investors want to see that, because if they're going to put money into something, they want to know who owns it, and that it doesn't belong somewhere else, and down the line someone isn't going to pop their head above the parapet and say, actually, that was mine, and they're going to lose a lot of the money they made on it, having to pay someone off. It rarely happens, but you need to keep your IP clean for that reason. Leveraging negotiations. So quite often, if you license something to a company, it's very difficult to license an idea or a project without any IP, because the IP is the tangible thing that you're licensing to someone. So a solicitor would have great difficulty writing an agreement that moved something, protected something without that IP protection. So IP is ultimately the thing that you're negotiating over. That's the thing that often moves and transfers in license agreements. Yes, there'll be things written around it, like terms within the agreement to show how a project would work or how a project would develop, but the thing that actually moves legally is often the IP, so it adds leverage in negotiations. And lastly, tax relief. Registered IP and R&D activities you can get tax relief on them. R&D tax credits. If these are things, if you're doing R&D work within your business, or you have an IP portfolio and you're not claiming R&D tax credits, I do advise you look into it. Cheers, Andy. Next one. So common IP issues, so things that you might come across in your business regarding IP, or certainly things that I see when working with businesses and things that we come across IP. The business doesn't know what IP they own. So as we discussed, you can get something called an IP audit that can be attained through the IP Audits Plus scheme, or you can just go to an IP attorney and ask for an IP audit. It will cost money. It can be at times funded through the IP Audits Plus scheme, but this is where an attorney comes in, looks at your business activities, looks at all your material, and helps you attain what IP you own and what you might want to do with that. Sometimes a company believes they own IP that they actually don't. So there's often an assumption, and let's take an example. So a client, a business pays a consultant to do some work for them, and when they pay for that work at the end of the project, they assume that IP reverts to them and they own the IP. This isn't always the case. So there's a lot of businesses out there who think they own a load of IP because they're paid for something, but if they actually look within the agreement they had with the consultant, they quite often have a royalty-free license to allow them to use the IP that was created, but they don't have the IP themselves. It still sits with the creator. So when you're contracting in third-party consultants, make sure your agreement transfers the IP back to you once you've paid for the project, because more often than not, it doesn't, and you don't actually own that IP. Companies using someone else's IP without authorization. Again, same example. If you've paid for some work from a consultant, you might be using that IP under a royalty-free license, and that license might have terms, and you might never have seen it because you assumed you just owned the IP because you'd paid for it. So again, be careful in that area and make sure that if you are using someone else's IP, that you have authorization to do it and that you are using it under the terms of any license that is in place. Businesses giving away IP for free. The reason this is in there is I worked with NHS Trusts for a lot of years, and NHS Trusts were absolutely terrible for giving away their IP for free. Company reps would be in the past, company reps would be in hospital trusts, in wards, over doctors' shoulders, over nurses' shoulders, watching them use their products and asking them and getting feedback and attaining feedback on their products. And all that feedback created by NHS clinicians is NHS IP. It's foreground IP. It's not owned by the company who created the product. It's owned by the NHS, and they were just giving that away for free. So be careful you're not giving your IP away for free. Again, that is stuff we can advise further on. And companies misinterpreting their position to third parties. This is a big one when people are going for funding. If you're going for funding and you're applying for funding, it's likely somewhere in the application it will talk about IP position of the project and where the IP sits and stuff. Too often companies don't get an assessment done on this, and they just say they own all the IP, and they're misinterpreting their position to third parties. It's worth getting an IP audit or getting expert advice that we can provide to make sure that you're not misinterpreting your position when you're applying for funding or putting bids in for tenders or whatever. Overestimating the value of third-party IP. So with regards to valuation of IP, there's no set rule book. A lot of businesses want there to be a set rule book, and they want to know how much their patent's worth and how much their copyright is worth and how much their trademarks are worth. Your IP is one part of work that you might do with a company. So if, for example, you're going into a collaboration, you will take a body of IP into that collaboration, but you will also offer a number of other things. You might be undertaking the marketing, you might be undertaking the manufacturing, and it's about valuing the project as a whole and seeing how much you're putting in and how much your partner's putting in, and then getting the, again, taking the valuation from there and not just relying on a valuation of IP itself. Companies unnecessarily seeking expensive registrations of IP. So the automatic assumption there is sometimes people go, I have an idea, I want to protect it. Oh, I need a patent to protect my idea. Can this person realistically exploit this patent to make money? They haven't thought about it. They just know that you protect ideas with patents. If your business plan and your IP strategy does not foresee how you're going to make your money back off that patent and make profit off it, then it might be the question of whether it's worth doing in the first place. Entering into confidential negotiations without an NDA. So confidentiality agreements, stuff we talk a lot about. Confidentiality agreements are there for initial discussions with businesses. So when you're talking about entering into a collaboration or you're putting a business proposal to someone, you want to get a confidentiality agreement in place to protect the information shared in an initial discussion. It's not an agreement that covers the whole relationship. It should be something that covers initial discussions to decide whether to pursue a further relationship. If a company decides to pursue a further relationship, they should look to put a more robust agreement in place, dictating how that relationship will work. But if you need help on confidentiality agreements and putting one in place to have initial discussions about your IP and your products and your potential ventures, we can support on that as well. And finally, companies failing to protect value IP rights with registered rights. So the unregistered trademark one is a classic. People use the same trademark. Every company will have a logo and a company name, and they may trade with it for years. It's not expensive to go online on the government website yourself and register your own trademark. And back in October last year, the Intellectual Property Office set up a system, what they call the pre-apply system, which really implores companies to register their own trademarks and not use attorneys. You can go on the government website, you will automatically get taken through the pre-apply service, and that will take you through the whole process of registering a trademark and whether you're registering the right trademark and that you can, and that your likely chances of being successful and such forth. So you don't need to be paying a legal attorney for this. You can go online on the government website and register it yourself. If you've got any questions about doing that or any concerns, again, that's something we can help with. Andy, next one. Okay, so I think this is the last one, but this is what I want you to take away from me rambling on for the past 20 minutes. So ultimately, please remember, ensure you have agreements in place addressing IP ownership with the following. So something in your employee contracts about IP ownership and where that any IP created sits. agreements with your customers about movement of IP and whether you want to hand your IP to them or whether you want to retain the IP, and third-party suppliers. So when you're contracted in external consultants or external businesses, who owns IP, who's paying for the project, and where the IP sits at the end of the project once it's paid for. And protect IP with registered rights. Registered rights with the IP office in this country, you wish to protect them, you can do this using patents, trademarks, or designs. These are 3 types of registered right that you register with the IP office. If you want any further advice on this, we are happy to help. And I think that's about everything. Is there anything else, Andy, on the next one?
That's great, Wayne. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, Wayne. That's great. I'd just mention that we're going to have questions at the end, so have a think about whether you've got any questions for Wayne and myself. Put them in the chat, or you can ask them in person at the end. So just to round off, really, I've got about 4 more slides to talk about innovation management, really, and what we can offer as Innovate UK Edge. So, innovation can sound relatively straightforward, but when you start to do it, there could be this long and winding road to achieving success. One of the things that we're quite well aware of and promote is innovation management as a process-led approach. And the idea of this is to take away some of the inherent risks that are involved. And there is actually now a guidance ISO available for innovation management, 56002, which lays out a company-wide approach to managing innovation. So that's well worth checking out in terms of getting some structure to what you do. So we've already talked about some of the approaches and tools you might consider, but we would argue it's a great idea to seek help, especially because it's hard to take time out of running a busy business and give innovation the careful thought that it deserves. And also having a fresh pair of eyes helping you to see things that perhaps you've missed because you're so immersed in the day-to-day running of your business, that can be invaluable. And a great place to start is by contacting us. Before I talk about the Edge offering, I thought a case study might paint a picture here as to the kind of work we do and the kind of successes that we potentially could help you achieve. So, what can success look like? So we've been working with a company called Trust Electric Heating for a number of years now, based near Leeds, small but rapidly growing company. When I met them about 3 years ago, they were literally just taking delivery of their first components, putting them on the bench and starting to build them up. But now they have some of the most technologically advanced space heating systems on the market today. But despite having some of those brilliant ideas and actually having secured their intellectual property, they were struggling to sort of take these to fruition due to funding constraints. We've worked with them over a number of years to help them with their strategic thinking, help them to apply for grant funding support, and which they've actually won, and helping the business to refine and perfect their approach to private investors has also paid dividends. So they've changed their approach to private investment and have a new investor. So Trust Electric have had assistance from Innovate UK Edge, along with the Pitch Fest program, which we actually ran last year, and we've just started running it again this year, which is where you'd work. It's a peer-to-peer program where you'd work with others to develop your pitch and test it and hone it and refine it, and then at the end you would pitch to investors. So Trust Electric have also won Innovate UK grant funding and benefited from advice from a number of our innovation and growth specialists. They've also received an intellectual property audit, which is something that Wayne touched upon, and that's helped them to define better what they do with the value they create within the business. So it's a strategy for identifying and protecting what they have. So this was a really good example where having a good idea was not going to be enough. It's how they protected it, it's how they funded it and developed a strategy, which has been key to their ongoing growth as a business. And they're just going from strength to strength. So Innovate UK Edge, hopefully by now you're sort of a little bit intrigued as to what we do and what we can offer. So we've got a broad offering. This ranges from funded bespoke one-to-one innovation management coaching, and that can be up to 5, 7, maybe even more days of our time helping you on a one-to-one basis. And this can help you source funding. That could be grant funding, private finance. We're very well connected, and we know the funding landscape and the business support landscape, so we can refer you to other sources of funding, as well as helping you to enter new markets through our continued involvement with the Enterprise Europe Network. So that's something which you might have heard of in the past. Enterprise Europe Network is something that RTC have been delivering for a number of years. Following Brexit, we're now delivering Innovate UK Edge, but still very much involved in the Enterprise Europe Network and the global reach that it has. And we can also offer you the Scale Up program for the highest potential businesses. So if your business is really high potential and is scaling, then that could be more suitable as a program to help you with. But a good place to start is at this website. It's brand new this year, and this is where you'll find all the detail and how to contact us. And I would encourage that you do that and have a chat with one of our specialists who would be happy to see how we can help. So that was it from me. So we've got a bit of time now for questions. I'm going to stop sharing so we can I can see you all.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much for those presentations. That was incredibly useful, and you did an amazing job of cramming so many tips and bits of practical advice into one presentation. That was really, really interesting. What we will do now is just to remind everyone, if you do have questions and you want to put those individually to the speakers, bob those in the chat now for those of you who are watching live. For those of you who are watching the recording, we are going to share speaker details in the comments on this video, so feel free to get in touch with them there or visit the website on the previous slide, or of course get in touch with myself and we'll be able to pass your details on. So I'm going to ask Andy, as he has hosting rights, to just stop the recording there, and then we'll move on to take questions from any of the live delegates. If you